Hi, everyone. So now we're finally coming to Justin Martyr, probably one of the most famous of these early apologists, and so definitely worth a good video talking about him. But there's a lot more than what we'll be able to cover in this video, so there will be some more videos down the road on Justin Martyr. So, generally, Justin Martyr, he's called, of course, Martyr, not because that's his last name, but because he was martyred during the reign of Marcus Aurelius. He lived between in the years 100 to about 165. So, what we know about him, what he's known for, we know him through three works that he published that have been attributed to him. There are other works that are said to be by him. For example, Eusebius lists 8 books, so there's 5 more, but they're disputed whether or not he wrote them, or we don't know. But we do have those. Some of those books, some of them are lost to history. Anyways, the three that are main known to him, 2 of them are apologies, or these defenses of the faith. The first of these is addressed to, quote, to the emperor Titus, Aelius, Hadrianus, Antonius, Pius, Augustus Caesar, and to his son Vericimus the philosopher, or likely Marcus Aurelius, and to Lucius the philosopher, the natural son of Caesar and the adopted son of Pius, and to the Senate with the whole people of the Romans. So this first apology centralizes around this argument about Christianity and not being a crime. So that at this time period, the Roman government was assuming Christianity to be just itself a crime. If you were a Christian, you are worthy of decapitation, actually. So, or the death penalty kind of thing. And so Justin is writing to the emperor and the Senate and so on to say, no, you can't do this. That's not right. He says, and I quote, "We demand that the charges against the Christians be investigated, and that if these be substantiated, they be punished as they deserve." His point was you can't kill someone just because they have a name. Right? I can call myself whatever I want. I could go around the streets here calling myself a member of ISIS. But just because I do that, that doesn't mean that I have committed atrocities that are associated with that name. So if I'm to be punished, I can't be punished just because I associate with a group. I need to be proper, just punishment demands that it has to be done according to someone who has acted in a certain way. And so that's what his argument is, and through this large thing. And then he goes through discussing the validity of Christianity. And at the end of the letter, he actually discusses baptism, the Eucharist, and a typical church service. We will do another video. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go through that right now, but I will do another video on early church worship in the near future. The second apology that Justin wrote is much shorter. It's you could probably read it in 10 minutes. It's rather short, but it's addressed to Romans. Generally, it's said to be addressed to the Senate, not to the emperor, but actually to the senators, during the reign of likely Marcus Aurelius. But he refers to events that happened during the reign of Antoninus Pius. He begins the letter with a large story about a Christian woman married to a very debauched and terrible pagan husband, and so she wants a divorce because she can't handle living with so much promiscuity and evil. She just needs to get away from this. It's too much. It's starting to corrupt her. She's finding herself drawn into sexual sin and things like this, that she has to get away from it. And so her husband doesn't like this, so after she files for divorce, he then turns her over to the emperor or to the governing officials as a Christian. And then he goes on, and then the story continues with the husband then condemning another guy as a Christian, and then there's a bystander who accuses the governor official and saying, "You just sent him off to be killed for being a Christian. That doesn't fit. He didn't do anything. You didn't even see if he did anything wrong." And then the governor's like, "Well, are you a Christian? Sounds like you are." And the guy's like, "Well, yes, I am." So he's like, "All right, you're killed too." And the whole point for Justin's story is saying, guys, this isn't right. You can't kill someone because they claim to be a Christian or not. What have they done? Have they done something worthy of punishment? Punish them accordingly, and so on. The third work that Justin is known for is called The Dialogue with Trifo, a Jew. This is kind of set up as a story where Justin encounters a certain man with others of his company. And so this is a dialogue. Now, a lot of ancient texts we have with Plato and others are set up as a dialogue where you're kind of invited into this scene where people are talking, asking questions. For example, Plato, his main protagonist in these dialogues is usually Socrates, who then is the one who is wise, who is asking these questions and challenging the views, and ultimately kind of the main takeaway usually would come from Socrates. Although sometimes his takeaway is, I know nothing. And that's true wisdom. Anyways, Justin follows this suit, and that's what this book is about. It's not meant to say this literally happened. He's not recounting an event. He's presenting an argument using a dialogue where you have someone questioning and someone answering, or a dialogue. So sometimes you can learn more, and it's easier to learn complex ideas by listening to people talk about them. And that's what this dialogue with Trifo is about. So at the beginning, Justin is hailed as, "O philosopher." And the reason for this is because Justin regularly would walk around wearing his philosopher garb, the robes of a philosopher, so that he would be identified with that. And he continued in his Christian life, maintaining his role and kind of social position as a renowned philosopher. But once he became a Christian, he switched his argument to now saying Christianity is the true philosophy. It is in Christ that we are able to find what philosophy is really looking for. So his thing is that Jesus is not only the culmination and the fulfillment of the Old Testament, Jesus is also the culmination of fulfillment of what all the Greek philosophy is looking for. And so that's one of the big things he was known for. And so this man Trifo, who comes up to Justin, he claims to be a refugee from the Bar Kokhba revolt. So remember, in the Kaiser Council, we talked about in the years 133 to 135, there was the Jew Bar Kokhba who started the revolt in response to Hadrian's work. So this kind of sets this time period that a man was coming, fleeing from that revolt into Rome, and meets up with Justin there. So this Jew kind of sets himself up also as someone who respects people in philosopher garb. So, and kind of sets the tone that he's a bit of a Platonic Jew, following on the lines of people like Philo of Alexandria, who was a Jewish philosopher seeking to reconcile Platonic philosophy with Judaism, and like the Old Testament, show how they can work together. And so you kind of see Trifo fitting this scheme as well, which in large ways, Justin himself was heavily influenced by Philo. And so it's really important to kind of then see those things playing out in this book. So Justin then relates the story of how he became a Christian. And we'll get to that in just a second. Then he proceeds after that to debate with Trifo the validity of the Old Testament, and of course how the Old Testament points to Jesus and how Jesus is the fulfillment of the Old Testament. And so that's where this book is largely an apology against the Jews rather than against pagan Romans. And also, in a key thing in this book, we'll do another video on this book later, but one thing that comes out of here too is Justin's defense for the Greek Old Testament as the Christian Old Testament versus the Hebrew Old Testament for the Jews. And it's a really interesting argument how he works that out. So who was Justin? Where did he come from? Justin was born in Palestine, so like Israel area, actually in Samaria, in the year 100. And his first apology, Justin, after that lengthy address to the emperor and so on, Justin then says, "I, Justin, the son of Priscus, the grandson of Bacchius, natives of Flavia Neapolis in Palestine." So Justin then identifies himself as someone who was born in the eastern side of the Roman world. And this is then why Justin would have been a Greek speaker rather than a Latin speaker, although there is evidence that Justin was very familiar and fluent in Latin. And it is interesting, him being born and raised over in Samaria, he had, as far as we know, he had no familiarity with Judaism right up until he became a Christian. And so he did travel around a lot through his life, geographically and philosophically. Geographically, eventually settling in Rome, and philosophically, what was his journey like? Well, he does recount that journey in the book, The Dialogue with Trifo. So first off, he admires philosophers. He desires to know God. That's what he's after. I want to know God. I want to know the purpose of humanity. And so he seeks it through philosophy, saying, philosophy is the way I'm going to find this answer. So let me look through here. So he starts by attaching himself to the Stoics, but quickly discovers that the whole concept of the knowledge of God is not really an important element of Stoicism, and so he moves on. He then joins the Peripatetics, which is a school coming out of the teachings of Aristotle, and Justin claims that they wanted him to pay a fee. They needed money from him. So Justin says, nope, I'm out of here. Next, he goes to the Pythagoreans. Yes, the father of the Pythagoreans is the same guy as in trigonometry, the Pythagorean theorem. Yes, that's where this comes from. It's a lot of connections here. But among the Pythagoreans, being mathematical connection there, they demanded extensive learning in the liberal arts, which Justin just did not have, did not really see the value of pushing through that, and so they expelled him. Said, no, we don't want you. If you don't want to go through all this liberal arts learning in mathematics, music, and art, we don't want you. So then Justin finds the Platonics, they're the Platonists, and this is what he says about them. I progressed and made the greatest improvements daily, and the perception of immaterial things quite overpowered me. And the contemplation of ideas furnished my mind with wings, so that in a little while I supposed that I had become wise. And such was my stupidity. I expected forthwith to look upon God, for this is the end of Plato's philosophy. Now, oddly here, we see, so he's being very critical of the Platonists, but he is going to turn this around as well to really elevate Plato as a very valuable asset, even for Christians. He does refer to Plato as kind of like a pre-Jesus Christian or pre-Christ Christian. He also says, a quote that's attributed to Justin is that what Moses was for the Jews, Plato was for the Greeks. So in the same way that Moses in the law prepares for Jesus, so too what Plato in his philosophy was, it actually prepares for Jesus as well. And like I said before, that Jesus is the fulfillment of all philosophy. So then he moves on, and so one day he's out on his own. He wants to be alone and just to think with his thoughts, like we see with Socrates doing in Plato's dialogues. But he meets with a certain old man. And then he proceeds to have a deep discussion with him. And this man starts questioning Justin. Why do you do this? What do you mean by God? What do you mean by happiness? Well, when you say this, how can the soul be immortal if this? And this old man starts tearing down point by point a whole bunch of Platonic ideas, particularly things that the soul is naturally immortal. This is not a Christian idea. The idea of a soul being naturally immortal does not come from the Bible. I know a lot of my conservative Christian friends may not like me saying this, but that's true. That comes from Plato. The reason we think that is because we see similar things, or it sounds like Paul is saying that, when really it's us in our Platonic type thinking that want to have that answer. And so too, Justin had that idea with Platonism, but when he left Platonism for Christianity, he knew that is not a consistent thing. Immortality comes from God, not from nature. So then this person then points to, after kind of questioning and challenging all these Platonic ideas, he moves over to Scripture and points Justin to this. And he says this: there existed long before this time certain men more ancient than all those who were esteemed philosophers. They are called prophets. And so he points Justin to the prophets of the Old Testament, saying these guys are even more ancient than the Greeks. And Justin later in this dialogue is going to say that Plato drew from these prophets as well. And then this man finishes his dialogue with saying, pray that above all things the gates of light may be open to you, For these things cannot be perceived or understood by all, but only by the man to whom God and his Christ have imparted wisdom. And then Justin says this, that as the man leaves, Justin says that he was ruminating on these words, thinking about them, and he said, "Straightway a flame was kindled in my soul, and a love of the prophets and of those men who are friends of Christ possessed me. And whilst revolving his words in my mind, I found this philosophy alone to be safe and profitable. Thus, and for this reason, I am a philosopher." And so there's that foundation that it's true philosophy is only found in Christ, that Christianity is the real philosophy, the true philosophy by which we can find God. And so note that in Justin's second apology, one of his main opponents that he is attacking is a man named Chryskins, a Cynic philosopher, or we understand that he was likely a Cynic philosopher. But that guy, of course, didn't like Justin, and given the time period and the way things worked back then, you could just accuse your neighbor of being a Christian if you didn't like them and they would be arrested. Now, if they denied Christ, they would be free to go. So it wasn't like, I want my neighbor dead, so I'll accuse them of being a Christian. If they denied Christ, they would be let go. But, of course, if they confessed Christ, they would be killed. And so Chryskins doesn't like Justin. He accuses him of being a Christian. Justin is then arrested and brought before the prefect of Rome, Rusticus. And now Justin actually then stood before Rusticus with 6 others. They were also 7 people together were condemned. And this is a dialogue that happens during this trial. Rusticus questions Justin. He says, "You who are called learned and think that you know true doctrines, if you are scourged and beheaded, do you suppose then that you will ascend into heaven to receive some recompense?" Justin replies, "I do not suppose it, but I know and am fully persuaded of it." And these are reasons I love Justin and these apologists, that at points it's not about trying to convince, it's about, I'm just persuaded of this. If you aren't, I pray that you might be. And then, of course, the others with him then said, "Do what you will, for we are Christians, and do not sacrifice to idols." And so then Justin Martyr and the 6 others were led off and beheaded. And this is that whole thing of what Justin Martyr was about, of confessing Christ as the true means by which we can know and see God. Thank you.